Hello, this is Sundiata here at the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Teaching Garden, and we had a few questions that came from a few of you from around the state, and we wanted to answer some of those questions so that you could get your fall garden going. So the first question was, what are good beginner crops to start in my fall garden? So the beautiful thing about the fall garden is we're going to be experiencing cooler weather, especially if you're in zone 8B all the way down to central Florida. When you get a little bit further south down into the southern Florida region, it can alter based on the different climatic conditions. So in the areas near North Florida down to about central Florida, some of the best fall crops are all of your leafy greens. So we're talking collard greens, mustard greens, all of the varieties, all of the varieties of kale, lettuces, Asian greens such as pak choy and different types of cabbages. So your regular cabbage, purple cabbage, also other greens like tatsoi, spinach, chard. These are greens that are a little bit more milder than your more rough collard greens and kale, but those greens are just perfect for this particular season. So those are all of your leafy greens that will do you well and provide lots of good iron over the course of the winter months. The further south you go towards more of South Florida, Miami, Fort Myers area, you can continue to plant things like peppers and tomatoes, and of course that's more of a tropical region, so you have a greater variety of fruits that you can also plant. So mostly fruit trees, so peaches and pears, ackee, persimmons, papaya, pineapple. Well, pineapple's not a tree, but you get what I'm saying, it's a good fruit. But all of those fruits are really, really good for that particular region also. So many of the crops that we grow here in the North Florida region that we would consider spring crops, and going into summer, you can still plant all of those same crops down in the South Florida region. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, squash, zucchini, things of that nature. Okay, so that was what are some of the best crops to grow in the fall. All right, the second question that we had, are raised beds better or are in-ground beds better? So that's a question that is up for debate from many different farmers and gardeners, and it really depends on aesthetics. It depends on how bad do you want to control weed pressure, how much depth do you want with your raised bed, because even though in-mound beds we sort of distinguish them between in-ground beds and raised beds, but a mounded bed without a wooden border or some type of border is still a raised bed. But the only difference is that you're not going to get the same height with a mounded bed that you would with a raised bed with a protective border. So when you're growing inside of a raised bed with wood or stone, brick, cinder block, then you have the ability and the option to build your bed as deep as you want. So when you're doing a raised bed, anywhere between 6 to 12 inches is your norm, but you can go deeper than that. I've seen raised beds that people have constructed that are 2 feet high. So we're talking 24 inches. Now, the roots of your vegetables during this time of the year don't necessarily need 2 full feet to grow and to expand their root system. But it's just a preference for a lot of people. So what I would recommend is just staying within, if you're going to do raised beds, just stay within the 6 to 12 inch range, and that'll give your crops plenty of room to grow. Now, if you're going to do mounded beds, which we consider in ground, a lot of times you'll end up adding, maybe 3 to 4 to 5 inches of good compost on your row, and that's sufficient space or sufficient depth for your crops to expand their root systems and grow to a full healthy size as well. And so the mounded in-ground beds are, you may have to fight weeds a little bit more than you would a raised bed with a protective border. So there are not a whole lot of differences other than the money that you would end up spending on wood or whatever material that you're using to enclose your compost. There's not a lot of difference that's going to, as far as results are going to be there between an in-ground mounded bed or a raised bed. So, so we're talking aesthetics. People tend to want that frame, and it gives it a nice, clean, crisp look. And a lot of school gardens, a lot of home gardens, and a lot of small community gardens usually go for that look because it's much more neat and much more orderly, according to some. So it's more of an aesthetic preference. But when you begin to scale up, when you begin to go on a much larger scale, the wood doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense, because if you're using non-pressure treated wood, that wood is going to give you a good 3 years before it begins to deteriorate and rot, and then you'll have to get rid of it or spend more money to try to buy more wood and more panels to replace that rotting wood. And that'll be an ongoing process so long as you want that clean, crisp raised bed. So as a small farmer as well as an urban farmer, I prefer in-ground mounded beds that are usually about 3 to 4, maybe 5 inches higher than the ground itself. And that's all you really need in order to grow great crops, in order to get the depth and the expansion that the plants will need in order to expand their root systems. So that is the difference between the raised bed and the in-ground sort of mounded bed.